Hello and welcome back to Realms Explorer. Today, we will try to explore the Middle East in a little detail. Why is the Middle East so chaotic? Why are there so many extremist outfits concentrated in this area? It is not my intention to go to the very depths and make clear everything about everything that happened. That is hardly something that's possible in one video. My aim is to provide a general outline of how things happened and what roughly lead to the emergence of the nations we see today in the Middle East. To understand this, we will need to start in the time surrounding the First World War. Immediately before the First World War, most of today's Turkey, the Levant, and Northern Africa was directly under the Ottoman Empire. The Arabian Peninsula was never really completely under Ottoman thumb, but that is only on paper. They just didn't bother directly controlling all the sandy regions. In the peninsula, they directly controlled the highlands of Yemen for its coastal placement, and they also directly controlled the Hijaz region. The Hijaz region was the political and religious center of the Arab world, with Mecca, Medina, and Jeddah situated in it. The Ottoman Sultan derived his legitimacy by ruling from these holy cities as Sultan. Even though Islam treated all ethnicities as equals, the Arabs still were the only people with the legitimacy to establish a caliphate, or so some believed. Though the Ottoman sultans have claimed the title of caliph for centuries, there's a reason that the Ottoman Empire is called a sultanate and not a caliphate. A sultan is not a caliph. A sultan is someone who only takes care of the political and administrative rule of a region under Islam. He has no power over the morals and ideals. Whereas, a caliph is the supreme leader of every Muslim living on this planet. As with Christianity, Islam too had its fair share of conflict between this secular leader, the Sultan, and the caliphate or religious leaders. In the case of the Middle East, the secular leader actually won, and succeeded in bringing in the Islamic Church through various machinations under his thumb. How this happened, and why it has changed in recent times, is a story for another time, though which I'm actually quite keen to tell. But, coming back to our current discussion. The Ottomans also controlled some parts in the east coast of the Arab Peninsula. This was primarily because of their desire to keep an eye on the neighboring Persians, who they had been in conflict with since centuries. Apart from the Ottoman Empire, the other major players were the Emirate and later, the Kingdom of Nejd, which had historically been under the House of Saud, and included most of the sandy Central Arabia, meaning today's Saudi Arabia. And the Trucial States, which included several small emirates, meaning ruled by an emir, on the Gulf Coast. And that is how the board was set, and now we will see what happens afterwards. Here, we will take a moment to delve just a bit deeper into the Emirates and what happened to them. This will help us in getting a clear picture of what happened to the Middle East as a whole later. Hello and welcome back to Realms Explorer, where we're currently exploring the Middle East. In the previous videos, we saw what the Middle East was like just before World War I. In this video, we will see what became of the Emirates and how the UAE was born. The word emir, also spelled Amir, comes from the Arabic root amr, which literally means to command, or to give an order. In a historical and political sense, it has evolved to mean several things depending on the context. At its core, an emir is a commander or leader. In early Islamic history, the term was primarily military. Amir al-Mu'minin, this title means commander of the faithful. It was a title used by the caliphs to signify their role as the military and political head of the state. Amir al-Bahr, this means commander of the sea, which is actually where the English word admiral comes from. Over time, as the central caliphate began to break apart into smaller regions, local governors or military leaders started ruling their own territories. Emirate, just as a king rules a kingdom, an emir rules an emirate. In modern Western terms, it is most closely translated as prince. Because the title implies a level of nobility and leadership below a sultan or a caliph, it was often used by rulers of smaller, specialized states, like the 7 Trucial States that became the UAE. Today, the title is still used officially in the Middle East for sovereign rulers of independent nations. Kuwait and Qatar are both sovereign states ruled by an emir. In the United Arab Emirates, UAE, Each of the 7 constituent states is ruled by an emir, and they collectively elect one of themselves to be the president of the federation. Unlike the mandates in Iraq or Syria, the trucial states were protectorates. Britain handled all their interactions with other countries, like Saudi Arabia or Iran, and defended them from sea attacks. The British generally stayed out of tribal business, local laws, and internal succession, as long as the peace at sea was maintained. In 1968, Britain announced it could no longer afford to maintain its military presence east of Suez. This forced the trucial states to decide their own future, leading to the formation of the UAE in 1971. After that, as we all know, they have tied their boats to the USA, with USA filling in Britain's role. Hope you enjoyed, and thank you for listening. Next time we will get into what happened during and after World War I that led to the birth of the rest of the countries that we see in the Middle East. The birth of Saudi Arabia is closely entwined with the events during the World War I. Though, it was always independent of Europe or the Ottomans. For this reason, it needs to be discussed along with the changes during the World War. Hello and welcome to Realms Explorer. Previously, we have seen how the UAE and a few other states, like Kuwait, were formed. This time, we continue with the rest of the story. So, just before the World War I, Turkey or the Ottoman Empire was on the side of the Triple Alliance, an alliance between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Opposing them was the Triple Entente, comprised of Britain, France, and Russia. How these blocs formed is a discussion for a different day and an interesting one which I will be taking on in a few days. So, as the World War was underway, every country involved was looking for allies. Turkey joined the Triple Alliance to defend itself against Russia meddling in the Balkans and encroaching on its territory inhabited by Slavs. Britain, looking for allies, promised the discontent Arab rulers or princes that they would give them independence and land if the Arab emirs helped destabilize the Ottoman Empire, so as to prevent the Ottoman Empire from helping Austria-Hungary. They also enlisted the help of Jews from all over the world, promising them a place in the Middle East, which the Jews claimed to be their ancestral homeland. This is how Israel came to be. Britain was forced to do this because its own manpower was falling short. The Arabs, or the emirs of the Hashemite lineage, that is, direct descendants of Hashim, the grandfather of the Prophet Muhammad, were the leaders of this revolt. They were based in the Hijaz region, that is the west coast of the Arabian Peninsula, consisting of Mecca and Medina. But why did they revolt? The Trucial States was the name given to a group of 7 sheikdoms on the southern coast of the Persian Gulf that eventually became the United Arab Emirates, UAE. The name didn't come from a shared cultural identity or a specific king, but from a series of truces or peace treaties signed with the British Empire in the 19th century. In the early 1800s, the British referred to this region as the Pirate Coast. The local seafaring tribes, most notably the Qawasim, were powerful maritime forces that frequently clashed with British East India Company ships to protect their own trade and territory. To secure their trade routes to India, Britain used gunboat diplomacy to force a change. The General Maritime Treaty of 1820. After a major British naval expedition, the local rulers signed a treaty to stop plunder and piracy. The Perpetual Maritime Truce of 1853. The rulers agreed to a perpetual peace at sea, effectively handing over their foreign policy and maritime defense to Britain. Because these states were now defined by these truces, the British stopped calling it the Pirate Coast and started calling it the Trucial Coast or the Trucial States. The 7 that we know today didn't all gain official trucial status at the same time. Britain only recognized rulers who were useful or stable enough to hold a treaty. 1. Abu Dhabi. 2. Dubai. 3. Sharjah. 4. Ajman. 5. Al Quwain. 6. Ras Al Khaimah, joined the others later. 7. Fujairah, only officially recognized as a trucial state in 1952. There was an 8th state called Kalba that was recognized in 1936 to facilitate a British landing strip, but it was reincorporated into Sharjah in 1951. The Hashemites were actually the emirs and sharifs, that is, officers appointed by the Ottoman Sultan himself, and for many years had cooperated with him. So why revolt? This happened because there was the Young Turk movement in Turkey, following which, the Turks increasingly started rebranding the Ottoman Empire as Turkic, as opposed to the previous multi-ethnic empire. They started imposing Turkic language in official communication, started changing the education, etc. This led to a serious conflict with the Arabs. The Arab people looked towards the Hashemite emirs, because they were a lineage who had legitimacy to establish a caliphate from both the Shia and the Sunni side, and had been the custodians of the holy places of Mecca and Medina since centuries. Also, the Ottomans built the Hijaz Railway from Damascus to Medina. To the world, it was for pilgrims. To Sharif Hussein of Mecca, it was a weapon. It allowed the Ottomans to send an army from Turkey to Mecca in days rather than months. It was a leash that made the Hashemites feel trapped. The Hashemites didn't just want to be emirs of Mecca under a Turkish sultan. They believed that since the Prophet Muhammad was an Arab, the leader of the Muslim world should be an Arab too. This led to them leading a rebellion against the Ottoman Empire with their own army, but with British economic and field support. And, by the end of the World War I, they did succeed. Faisal, the son of the Sharif of Mecca, Hussein bin Ali, was the primary field commander of the Arab Northern Army. Alongside T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, he led his forces from the Hijaz northward through the desert. Every mile they fought northward, taking the port of Aqaba, and eventually Damascus, was seen by Faisal as liberating Arab land. Entering Damascus was the ultimate prize. In the Arab world, Damascus had been the capital of the Umayyad Caliphate. Ruling from Damascus gave Faisal a level of historical and political prestige that the desert of Mecca simply couldn't match in the eyes of modern nationalists. As a Hashemite, Faisal was a Sayyid, descendant of the Prophet. In a region where the Ottoman Sultan had claimed the title of Caliph, religious leader, Faisal was one of the few people who could challenge that religious authority with his own family tree. While the Hashemites were from the Hijaz, the secret Arab nationalist societies, like Al-Fatah, were based in Damascus and Baghdad. These intellectuals and officers didn't want to be ruled by a desert tribe, but they needed a charismatic leader with a famous name to lead the movement. They essentially adopted Faisal as their figurehead. The British provided the gold, the guns, and the political backing. Faisal believed that as long as the British were on his side, his right to rule Greater Syria was internationally guaranteed. The Hijaz, or the western coast, was actually recognized as an independent kingdom right after World War I. The Hashemites, led by Hussein bin Ali, the Sharif of Mecca, declared himself king of the Hijaz in 1916. The plan was a Hashemite empire. The father would rule the holy cities, Hijaz. Faisal would rule the north, Syria, Iraq. Abdullah, Faisal's older brother, would rule the regions in between. The British and French recognized him as an independent monarch. Because he was their ally in the war, they didn't place a mandate over him, they treated the Hijaz as a sovereign state. Because the Hijaz was independent, and not a British mandate, the British were not legally obligated to defend it when Ibn Saud, from the Nejdi, attacked in 1924. He unified the Nejdi in the center, and Hijaz to the west, into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932. The British essentially stood by and watched as their former ally, the Hashemites, were defeated and the land was annexed into what became Saudi Arabia. By the time Ibn Saud conquered Mecca and Medina, the British decided it was easier to just recognize his new kingdom than to try and stop him. The Hashemites were so focused on gaining the civilized north, Syria and Iraq, that they left their backyard, Mecca and Medina, vulnerable to Ibn Saud, who was quietly consolidating power while the Hashemites were busy playing international politics in Damascus and London. And that was how the current nation of Saudi Arabia was born. Out of the independent kingdom of Nejdi, waging war against the Hashemites to the west, and annexing the territories of Mecca and Medina. After the World War ended, the League of Nations had awarded parts of the Middle East as mandates to Britain and France. These were not meant to be permanent colonies, but supervisions. Many today, however, consider it as just another form of colonialism. Essentially, the map was split into two worlds. The mandated north, controlled by Europe, and the sovereign south, won through tribal conquest. It's a major reason why Saudi Arabia's government and legal system look so different from its neighbors today. Europe didn't yet know of the vast reserves of oil in Saudi Arabia, and were only concerned with the oil in the regions of what is today Iraq and the fertile lands of the Levant that is most of today's Syria, then called Greater Syria, and consisting of Lebanon, etc. Faisal had succeeded in his military campaign, finally conquering Damascus. He then ruled, from there, as per his father's plan, to establish a Hashemite empire. The region was called Greater Syria, and included today's Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, etc. Iraq wasn't a nation yet, it was composed of emirates, like Baghdad, etc. Faisal declared himself king of Greater Syria in 1920. But immediately after, the mandates came into effect, and much of Great Syria, including present-day Syria and Lebanon, passed to France. Many among the British did actually want to keep Great Syria for the Hashemites, as they had been loyal supporters and had developed camaraderie. But, in the higher circles, the deal was already sealed. Britain decided it would much rather not risk a conflict with France, especially after the World War, which left it super low on resources and wealth. And so, it happened, the French ordered Faisal to get out of their mandate, which he obviously did not. He looked to the British for help, but they couldn't. So, he went to battle with France, which naturally resulted in his defeat. The French also created Lebanon, out of Greater Syria, because they wanted a Christian-majority sovereign nation. The British, partly to placate Faisal, and partly out of guilt, gave him the Kingdom of Iraq, which was under the mandate of the British. This is how Iraq separated itself from Greater Syria and the Ottoman Empire. Many in Iraq accepted this arrangement because they thought it was better to be under a Hashemite king than under Britain or Europe. But that uneasy compromise didn't last long. After this, Faisal's brother, learning of his brother's difficulties, took his own army and started marching towards Damascus. But he was stopped by the British and given a kingdom, that is, the Transjordan Kingdom, from within their mandate. This ultimately transformed into today's Jordan and is still being ruled by a Hashemite king. The other part of the British mandate, neighboring the Transjordan Kingdom, was eventually carved into Israel and Palestine, as promised to the Jews. And lastly, North Yemen was an Ottoman province that became an independent Mutawakkilite kingdom in 1918, after the Ottomans left. South Yemen remained a British protectorate, Aden, until 1967.